2013, 30 students at the University of South Carolina undergraduate Anthropology 212 food and culture class began the snack project. And although I decided on the general topic of snacks, it was the students who agreed on an overall hypothesis to guide this first leg of the project. They decided on an appropriate oral interview length, and they devised a series of oral interview questions. And all of this was done in coordination with an input from undergraduate students in a similar class at UNC Charlotte. And this was the first time I taught this class also. Today I want to talk about how anyone may incorporate undergraduate research experience into non-laboratory courses. Plus I'll introduce, I'll talk a little bit about what previous researchers have found out about or said about snacks. And in part, I'll talk about some of our findings, but not nearly all because I was organizing the conference. Okay, I've been running undergraduate research projects like this for 20 years. Twice now in coordination with sometimes very different classes at other universities, or sometimes in more than one of my classes. And these are some of my previous projects with undergraduate students. More often than not, I run each project for several years, compiling a large database that the students may use. So I call what I do research-based learning, and if you've seen the brand new Innovative Strategies, I have a chapter on that book. So I will start by outlining the sequence of events or assignments for the students in the food and culture class, and then move on to talk about the snack definitions in the literature, and then the snack definitions that they collected from interviews. So in class, the students learned about basic ethnographic methods. We talked about the ethics of human subject research. They had some exercises on that. And they began working on the official city certification, which is a nationwide certification for human subject research. And it's a 5-hour online course. So they all got professional level certification that lasts for 3 years. We researched previous snack research, and it was me and some of the students who needed to make up time for some other assignment they couldn't do. And only at the end of that did we find somebody else who had summarized all that other research. Then students met in groups to brainstorm on what is a snack. And I'm going to show you some of those group answers, and we don't want to dwell on them, I just want you to see. And then I summarized what they had said, and I summarized what we found out from that summarizing article. And then they, in conjunction with the other students, kind of back and forth. We met at different times of the week, so we had kind of a half-a-week lag on feedback to each other. They decided on the interview questions, so these were written by the students. So here is that summarizing article, and sorry I don't have the reference at the end, that we didn't find until we were done almost doing the same thing. But here are some of the definitions. And by far, almost all of the research that's done prior to our work and prior to a current study by someone at my university, Christine Blank, who works on food schema. She's presently, right now, working on snack schema, but all the other literature is pretty much on obesity. That's it. And so here are some ways in which people have tried to define what is a snack. They've also looked at time of food consumption. They've also looked at kind of like how many calories in how short a time to define snacks. So these are researchers trying to define what's a meal versus what's a snack. We've had some hybrid definitions. This one has not been widely adopted, but they tried to come out with complete meal, incomplete meal, less balanced meal, vegetarian meal. Has not come on. And here's some examples of how they would take, here's what you ate, that's what we would call it. So this is from the literature. Also, there's been self-designation by consumer, and that's, of course, what we ask people to actually give us a definition of snack. As opposed, I think this is oftentimes you say, what did you eat for meals, what did you eat for snacks, and they'd record the different answers. We ask them to actually define snack. Here's another thing from the literature. And then following their exhaustive summary, these guys came up with their own definition of snack. And here's their definition. And you see that they include beverage, and that's kind of an issue. Are you going to include beverage or not as a snack? And so this was their overall definition. So the students did see this before they wrote the interview questions. So I put them into 8 groups at just how many students showed up in class that day, not all 30. And We ended up with 8 groups, and so that was about 3 to 4 students per group, and they brainstormed. They had 15 or 20 minutes to brainstorm on what is a snack. And I don't want to dwell and read every line, but I just want you to see some of the interesting things they came up with. Here's one group's answer. I like this, you don't need snacks. Here's another group's answer. They talk about the difference in preparation, a difference in size and quantity. Here's another group's definition. They obviously came up with a lot more things to say. They talk about them being stigmatized as unhealthy. They're acceptable anywhere, but meals aren't. I thought that was interesting. You could eat a snack anywhere, but you couldn't necessarily eat a meal anywhere. Here's another group's answer. Keeps you going, meant to satisfy you. Both a meal or a snack can be healthy or unhealthy. And here's another, this is part of that same group, I think. Supposed to keep you from feeling hungry but not make you full. Talk about maybe when you're bored, you snack. And then here's one of the other group's definitions. They talk about a meal carrying more emotional symbolism and being a social event. And part of this is from some of the stuff we were talking about in class, some of the meetings we were doing in class about meals. And here's another group that's going to have 2 pages. They talk about, well, you have a protein, a starch, and a vegetable in the meal, and they have these names. And then a snack is usually just one thing, and meals bring people together. And here's that same group continuing on. Snacks can be random. There's social rules and etiquette for eating a meal, but snacks can be on the go. And then here's yet another group that's got 2 pages of notes. A meal is a ritual, multiple components, designated times. It's a social event if possible. But both have similarities. And then I like that snacks are in motion, meals are stationary. You can buy snacks in vending machines. Yeah. And then here's one of the other groups. Both are food, both can be social events, this group said. You're thinking of like football, parties. Okay, so following these in-class group definitions, the class as a whole then met to finalize what should be our interview. And they came up and they said, well, we think that 15 minutes, people would talk to us for 15 minutes, so we got to keep it to 15 minutes. And I posed some considerations to them. I said, well, are we going to include liquids or not? And they decided yes. So like a malt shake could be a snack. Okay, so they also came up with some kind of overarching hypotheses, not that they had to follow through on these. And one was that our preferences in snacks change during our lifetime. So the things you liked as a 5-year-old would not necessarily be what you like when you're 60. And secondarily, the same foodstuffs could be a meal or a snack. And they particularly were talking about pizza. One piece of pizza is a snack, more than one piece is a snack. And the students in both classes went back and forth. I think our class maybe did the majority of it, but we kind of went back and forth on things we wanted. We had some suggestions and then we dropped them, and we were going to do cards, and we ended up not doing cards, thank goodness. So, and I'll come back later then to the actual question, sorry. So now let me circle back around to, again, what the class was doing. Once we had the questions, I could receive Institutional Review Board exempt status for this project. Because we were only going to interview adults for this initial phase. Later on, I would like to interview children. And the students then practiced interviewing and recording each other in class before I turned them out. They actually had an informed consent script they had to read by our IRB rules. And they were given deadlines for turning in their interviews. And if they did not turn in their informed consent, then they had not turned in an interview. And each student agreed that they would each conduct at least 3 interviews, and of those, only one could be between the ages of 18 and 22. And in South Carolina, an adult is age 18. So they could only interview one other college-age student. The other class at UNC Charlotte did not follow that rule. So we have a lot of people who are around age 18 to 22. So to spread out and get some other ages, you have to make that a requirement. And then they had to enter directly into an Adobe Form Central that I set up, and it's an online form. They stick it in and it goes into a database, and I can download it in Excel files. And it also will make pie charts if you have the right kinds of questions. And then I made all the data available. And so by the deadline of when they had to have, so students had to then take the data the entire class or both classes collected and write an individual hypothesis-driven paper based on some aspect they're interested in on all the data. So by the deadline, they had 81 interviews. Now by the end of it, we had 204 or 206. But by their deadline, my class was ahead of the other class. We had 81. So they had to write a paper on 81 interviews. They turned in testable hypotheses, and oftentimes they had to turn them in 3 or 4 times before I approved them. So I had to approve their hypothesis. And they often had great ideas, but we didn't collect the data. And so this was an extremely difficult and heart-wrenching thing for them to find out how precise you need to be in wording your hypothesis. And anyway, it was a very good experience for all of them, I'm sure. And then they also had to turn in their table headings when they turned in their hypothesis. So to test your hypothesis, what would be the headings? Not the data yet, but the headings. And we went through that. Then they also, before they actually turned in their paper, had to turn in their actual data-filled tables. Because many of them, and I made them just do percents. But they had trouble figuring out should the percents go across or go down, and so many of them had to do that 3 or 4 times. And then each student turned in a short paper, and by that I mean 3-page paper. Because 30 students, I could not grade full papers. And then each student gave a 4-minute presentation, and 2 of the students went on to give papers at conferences on campus. Okay, so what do students get out of, why do this kind of teaching, and what do students get out of it? And in past years, students did write complete research papers. This year we left out the literature review and the references cited, because I know that that's the major problem, and I did not have time to go over those over and over again. So, why do I think classroom experiences like this are valuable for students? Well, research learning, based learning provides training and practice for students in a number of broad learning objectives: how to pose a research question, how to test the question, how to present research findings, and how to practice research integrity. And not all students can join a full-time undergraduate research experience, but most classes can be structured to include elements like this. Maybe not as major as this, but this was not a major part of the class, actually. And I'm a firm believer that research skills are not learned solely by observation, but they need to be taught, practiced, and critiqued. And obviously, by incorporating a research project into an introductory level class, I believe the earlier in the career of a college student you can provide such experience, the more the student may benefit throughout the rest of their college career. And you can incorporate research-based learning into your classes in assignments that take as little as 5 to 10 minutes, or they can be expanded to form something like this where you're doing a group project. But to do so, you have to be willing to give up some content and instead spend some time on how to. So what interview did they compose? Well, it began with 5 questions about the person: age, sex, self-defined ethnicity, places they've lived for 3 or more years, and when. They thought that might really influence it. And age at which they became responsible for their own food, because some of these students might not yet be responsible for their own food. And then the 5 basic questions within it were: define snack, define meal, list your 5 favorite snacks. Of these 5 favorite snacks, have you always preferred them? And then why do you purchase the snacks that you buy? And this last one was a menu, and they could choose more than one, but we gave them the choices. So this one actually, I have a big pie chart in my Excel thing that is generated automatically on this one, which I'm not showing you. Have you always preferred these snacks? Explain. And how frequently do you eat each of your 5 favorite snacks? And which of these are also sometimes eaten in or as a meal? So they could give these interviews in 15 minutes. Some students actually took 10 or 11 interviews because they had to make up other work they didn't do in class. Okay, so they proposed their own, his, individual unique hypotheses, and they mostly examined why people say they snack, gender differences, age and gender differences, and a couple of them examined differences in snacking based on places lived. So if you lived internationally, did you eat more unique foods? And some students drew upon the readings or discussions we'd had in class to formulate their hypothesis. And some of them, something was odd or repetitive that in their interviews, and that struck them, and then that's what they wrote about. 41% of the students examined gender, And here are some of the topics of those talks. And I'm actually going to show you the slide presentation. Again, we can't dwell on one of the students who then gave this paper at a conference. And this was the paper that all the other students were most amazed at. Zakia Collier does sex influence, and she looked at all 204 interviews, 204, 206. She was, they had to have 5 PowerPoint slides for their presentation. They got 3 minutes each. Hypothesized that female participants will more frequently list specific brand names than will men. And all of us said, yeah, that sounds reasonable. And she gives her methodology. And she ended up taking out, on my advice, and redoing the data completely over, bless her heart, taking out all the unprocessed snacks, because how often do you know the brand name of your carrots? And lo and behold, the males were more likely to list the brand names than the females. So totally unexpected. And so we had lots of wonderful papers like this. One's on emotion, not on obesity. None of them were on obesity. And she gives, some examples of here's a male listing by brand name, his snacks. So her hypothesis was unconfirmed, males not females, and of course she gives her acknowledgments. So I can state that their research, although kept deliberately brief by me, comprises a real addition to snack research. Public research overwhelmingly examines the relationships between snacking and obesity, and few other sources of snack studies exist. Most notably, Christine Blake at University of South Carolina, the snack schema she's just now researching. So now I'll talk a little bit about tiny little bit of data correlation I could do. I took the snack definitions and divided them into 11 different categories of answers. When I looked at the answers, I'll give you an example now. So here, for example, if somebody says a snack is a meal between a meal, that's one simple thing. It has one component. It's when it is. Here's another more complex definition. It's a small portion of food that's not used to cure hunger, but to provide a short amount. And so I divided that into those 5 different categories of elements of the answer. And then only 4 of the categories were included in snack definitions by approximately 25% or more of the participants. And a 5th, number per day, was included in many of the meal definitions. And overwhelmingly, people define snack as a small portion of food. And by contrast, a meal is a large portion of food. And the majority of people also define a snack by when it occurs. Particularly women more so than men. And 34 to 42% talked about the intention or purpose of the snack. And generally, around 20 to 25% talked about the content of the snack. And relatively few people talked about preparation. Unlike most snack definitions, meals were sometimes defined as social get-togethers, particularly in reference to families. Okay, and some people define snacks only in opposition to meals. And the ones that I bold are ones that I saw over and over and over. Those are things, you just expect that phrase. Well, what's a snack? Well, it's not breakfast, lunch, or dinner. So I have yet to delve into the very rich data set collected by the students, but what I do want to say, what do I think that students gain from participating in a research project like this? Well, out of the 30, 27 fully participated. And we, between us and the other group, recorded 204 interviews. Mostly my students did the majority of those. What did they gain? Well, they got something to put on their resume, professional level, 3-year city certification. They got experience in composing research questions, experience in writing clear testable hypotheses, and in making concise, clear tables. And I made them do their tables over and over again until they got my approval. And then experience in writing a clear research paper, even though it was just 3 to 4 pages. That's all I could grade with 27 students. So that was the first time I've tried that as a very, very short paper, and it was highly successful. And that's it.
We've got time for one quick question.
Yes.
What kind of readings would you pair with?
On snack?
Yeah. To help them research to help get their minds in the right place about.
Well, meanwhile, this is a food and culture class, so we're learning about food and culture. So those readings add into the mix. And then just on snacks, it's almost all on obesity. So for those who did take their papers on to give at conferences, I had to like coach them, well, sure there's no other paper like yours, but there's readings on gender, or there's readings on this, and you would bring in those issues. But the snack literature is heavily weighted toward obesity. Yeah, but there is a big literature.
Hold on real quick. Is Stephanie Boreals here? Okay, then you can ask questions for 20 minutes.
Okay, just a short question, Gail. Are you going to upload this in the Open Science Network?
Well, I have a whole book chapter in the innovative strategies in teaching plant sciences on doing this kind of project.
I'll read it.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, well, we're going to actually